At 0240 hours local time, the northern approach to the Armiansk bridge turned white. A fuel truck sitting near the middle of the column split open, and the fire that came out of it did not stay with the truck. It ran forward along the line of parked vehicles, found the next tank, and kept going. The drones that started it had crossed roughly 60 miles of open ground and shallow salt water to reach that span. Waiting for them, stacked on and around a single crossing, were as many as 50 Russian trucks loaded with ammunition and fuel. Inside of a few minutes, the fire column standing over the bridge reached close to 200 feet, and the glow was visible from 15 miles out across the flats. But none of that was the unusual part of the night. The unusual part was that all 50 of those trucks were in the same place at the same time. They had been pushed there. Armiansk sits at the very top of Crimea on the Perekop isthmus, a strip of land only a few miles wide with salt lagoons pressing in from both sides. There is no scenic route through it. There is no field a driver can pull into. Whatever goes overland between the Ukrainian mainland and the Crimean peninsula goes through a small number of fixed crossings, and Armiansk is one of them. By the time of this strike, it had become the important one. The Chonhar bridge, further east, had already taken structural damage severe enough that Ukrainian commanders described it as unusable for traffic. That left the northern route carrying the load. According to Ukrainian military statements, the trucks concentrated at Armiansk that night were being staged for the Henichesk direction in Zaporizhia Oblast, fuel and ammunition intended for Russian mechanized units fighting in that sector, which is why the campaign did not begin at Armiansk at all. It began with the other doors. Chonhar was hit and hit again. Crossings near Henichesk and Stavok were struck in the same window. Each one that went down did not reduce the amount of fuel and ammunition Russia needed to move into and out of the peninsula. It simply removed a place to move it through. Think of 4 lanes of highway narrowing down to a single toll booth. The traffic does not disappear, it stands still, and it stands still in one line, in one place, where anybody watching from above can count it. Russian logistics planners were not being careless by using Armiansk. They were being forced. It was the route that still worked, so it was the route that had to carry everything, and the more it carried, the longer the line grew. That is the part that is easy to miss. A truck column on the Perekop isthmus cannot turn around. It cannot spread out. It cannot pull off the road and wait somewhere safer, because there is no somewhere safer. There is a raised roadway, salt water on both sides, and the vehicle in front of you. Once the column commits to that stretch, it is committed. 3 bridges had been broken inside of a few days. The 4th was still standing, still open, still carrying traffic, and Ukraine was leaving it that way on purpose. The approach to Perekop is not a hiding place. It is flat. Salt pans, shallow water, low scrub, almost nothing that stands taller than a fence post. For a low-flying strike drone that is a mixed blessing, there are no ridgelines to slip behind, but there is also nothing for a ground radar to see past. And at very low altitude over water and flat salt, the horizon itself does most of the concealing. A radar mounted on a vehicle a few meters off the ground can only look so far down before the curve of the earth takes the target away from it. The drones came in low and came in at night, and for most of the run, the only thing that mattered was staying under that line. And a queue does something a convoy never does. It waits. Hitting a column on the move means solving for a place it has not reached yet. Find it, track it, predict it, and get something into the air early enough to meet it there, knowing that every minute spent deciding is a minute the column has spent going somewhere else. None of that applies to vehicles that are not moving. The lead truck is stopped because the truck ahead of it is stopped, and nothing about that changes until the bottleneck gets wider. The bottleneck was not going to get wider. Ukraine never had to solve the moving version of that problem, because 3 earlier strikes had already converted it into the standing one. What was waiting at the crossing was the last layer. The Pantsir S-1 is the system Russia puts on top of things it cannot afford to lose. A single vehicle carrying its own search radar, its own tracking radar, missiles, and rapid-fire cannon. It is built to be self-contained. It does not need a network to function. and it does not need much warning to shoot. On paper, the reaction time is measured in single-digit seconds from detection to launch, and against a threat coming at a defended point, that is usually enough. But the thing being defended at Armiansk was not a point. It was a line, a bridge, an approach road, and a column of vehicles strung out across several miles of causeway. Picture a goalkeeper trained his entire career to stop penalty kicks and then being asked to defend a ball rolling along the ground somewhere behind him. Every skill is real. None of them apply to the geometry he has been handed. That is where the seconds stop being impressive. A crew has to detect the contact, classify it as a threat rather than clutter, slew onto it, and commit. Even at the fast end, that sequence eats several seconds, and several seconds at low-level cruise speed is thousands of feet of ground covered. On a target the size of a hangar, thousands of feet still lands you inside the defended bubble. On a target the length of a highway, it puts the drone past the part of the road the Pantsir was covering and into the part it was not. The system could absolutely have protected that bridge. The problem was that on this particular night, the bridge was not the most valuable thing standing on the bridge. The other layer was invisible. Electronic warfare has been the quiet argument of this entire war. And around fixed crossings, the Russians have made a habit of parking systems like the R-330Zh Zhitel, a mobile jamming station whose job is to smother the signals a drone depends on. It goes after satellite navigation, and it goes after the control link, and inside its coverage area, it can turn the sky into something close to a dead zone for anything that needs to hear a voice from home. Against a first-person view quadcopter, flown by an operator watching a live video feed, that is close to a kill switch. Cut the link, and the aircraft is a falling object. But jamming only works on something that is still listening. A long-range strike drone that has already been given its target and is flying a loaded route is not waiting for instructions. It is not asking a question. It is executing a decision that was made before it ever entered the jamming envelope. Shouting at it is like shouting at a letter you already dropped in the mailbox. The words are loud, the message is real, and the envelope keeps going exactly where it was addressed. That is the mismatch that kept repeating along this corridor. The defense was configured against the war's most common threat, and the aircraft arriving was not that threat. It is worth saying why that mismatch happens so often. Coverage is never free. Every system has to be somewhere, and the somewhere gets chosen against the threat that shows up most. On the approaches to Crimea, the threat that shows up most is small, cheap, radio-linked, and flown by a person watching a screen. So that is what the coverage gets built around, and against that threat it works. The trouble is that the same corridor also has to survive the threat that shows up rarely, and rare threats are the ones nobody optimizes for until after they have already arrived. Then the night changed shape. The mission that was planned was a bridge mission. Break the span, break the route, and the logistics problem takes care of itself over the following weeks. But a crossing that has become the last working crossing does not sit empty, and when the strike package arrived, the deck and the approach road were not clear. They were full. Vehicles nose to tail, engines running, waiting their turn through the bottleneck that 3 earlier strikes had created, which meant the target had quietly upgraded itself. It was no longer just the structure, it was the structure and everything queued on top of it. And hitting both at once does something a bridge strike alone cannot do. A damaged bridge is an engineering problem. A damaged bridge with 50 burning trucks on it is a bridge nobody can get engineers onto. What happened inside that decision window is not documented anywhere, and what follows is a reasoned reconstruction of an outcome that is, because the trucks did not know any of this. From inside the column, it was a slow night on a bad road, the same road they had used the night before, and the vehicle carrying the fuel was already past the point where it could have chosen a different one. The first hit went into the line, not the span. Fuel does not explode the way film makes it look. It vents. A ruptured tank throws vapor first, the vapor finds air, and the air finds heat, and then the whole cloud lights at once in a flash that moves faster than anything on that road could react to. The truck it came from was gone in the first second. The trucks on either side of it were not gone. They were on fire. which is worse, because now they are heat sources parked against the next tank in line. That is how a column dies, not all at once, in order. The fire walked the queue. Fuel, then something heavier. Ammunition does not need a direct hit. It needs time and temperature, and a burning vehicle sitting alongside it supplies both. The first cook-off changed the sound of the night. A sharper, flatter crack, then another, then a run of them overlapping. Cases went off inside covered beds. Beds came apart. Fragments crossed the road and put holes in the vehicles that had not caught yet, and holes in fuel tanks are how you get more fuel in the open. Drivers ran. There was nowhere to run to that was not the causeway, and underneath all of it, the bridge was taking a beating. It was never designed to take. Structures do not mind cold weight. They mind heat and shock. Sustained fire pulls the strength out of steel while it is still standing. Repeated blast loading works the joints. Somewhere in that sequence, the deck stopped being a road and started being a collection of pieces that used to be a road, sagging along one span, cracked through the surface, with burning vehicles still sitting on the part that had not gone yet. 2 minutes. That is roughly how long the useful part of it took. At the end of it, the column could not advance because the road ahead was gone. It could not reverse because the road behind was blocked by the vehicles that had already stopped. And it could not disperse because it was standing on a strip of raised roadway with salt water on both sides. Everything Russia had been forced to funnel through one crossing was now sitting on that crossing, and none of it was going to Zaporizhia. Militarily, the accounting is unusually clean for a strike of this kind. Ukrainian forces reported up to 50 military vehicles hit at the crossing, loaded with ammunition and fuel that had been staged for the Huliaipol direction. That is not a convoy in transit. That is a shipment, the kind that gets assembled once, moved once, and is expected to last a formation for a while. None of it arrived. And the bridge itself came out of the night in a condition Ukrainian commanders described bluntly, damaged badly enough that it did not need to be struck again. That sentence is worth sitting with. The measure of success was not that the structure fell, it was that nobody on the other side was going to bother trying to use it. Strategically, this was never one night's work. It was the last move in a sequence. Chonhar, then the crossings near Henichesk, then Stavok, then Armiansk, each strike removing an option rather than destroying an army, until the remaining option was carrying a load it was never meant to carry alone. That is what makes this campaign different from the strikes that get more attention. Nobody was trying to take Crimea, they were trying to make Crimea expensive to supply. A peninsula does not have to be captured to stop functioning as a military rear area. It only has to become somewhere that things are hard to get into and hard to get out of. There is a compounding effect underneath that. Logistics runs on predictability more than on capacity. A planner can work with a route that is slow as long as it is slow in a way that can be scheduled around. What a planner cannot work with is a route that might be open tomorrow and might not. Once a crossing turns into a question mark, everything upstream of it starts holding stock it would rather be moving, and stock that is being held is stock sitting still in one place. Which is exactly how the next column ends up looking like the last one, and it is worth being precise about what this does not mean. The peninsula is not sealed. Ferries exist. Pontoon crossings can be laid, and Russian forces have laid them before. Rail and road can be repaired, and given enough time and enough concrete, they will be. What changes is the cost of every ton that moves. More handling, more delay, more places where a shipment has to sit still while somebody figures out how to get it across water. In a war where the front line moves slowly and ammunition decides most of what happens, that cost is the point. Ukraine did not knock down 4 bridges. It knocked down 3, and then let the 4th do the rest of the work. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more analysis like it. And here is the question worth arguing about in the comments. With the overland routes gone, Russia falls back on ferries and pontoon crossings. Which of those two do you think survives longer, and why?